right, everybody, it's Anthony Brogdon, your main man, at you once again on Strong Inspirations, where I give it to you straight, no chaser. And check it out. I think my guest is kind of buying into that straight, no chaser thing because they coming at it with the strength. Oh my God, the guy that got on the channel, he got a backdrop. My man got a nice shirt on and hat, and he's smiling. He said, I got this history that I got to get off my chest and let y'all hear what I know. I said, man, let me tell you, everybody, he on early. He beat me on the channel today. I love it when they do that because sometimes I get a little nervous. I'm like, oh man, I didn't send a message. Hope they show up. And they, most everybody do. I've had a couple of people, but not this guy. Oh no, he been looking, I got a feeling he been looking forward to this. I'm Anthony Brogdon. I'm the host. I'm of Strong Inspirations, where it happens a lot of Black history from all facets. So I really want you to know a couple things. I'm having my own festival in Kansas City, Kansas, May 27th through the 29th. This is one of my films right here, everybody. It's called Business in the Black, The Rise of Black Business in America, 1800 to 1960. I'm telling you, slaves went to college. There were 3 HBCUs open before slavery ended and another 3 open in 1865. Howard had a law school, 1888. Who were them? Former slaves, or maybe they wasn't slaves, but they Black folk. It's in my film. It's streaming on Amazon. I want you to watch that. And let me tell you something else. I do write, and I wrote this book. It's called Black Business Book. You can see it, my friends. Get you a copy. I had a lot of orders last night. To you people who ordered it, thank you. I had a lot of orders. I spent a lot of time. My assistant, I got an assistant now, everybody. My assistant helped, type up the names and put the books in the envelopes so that we can ship them out. Because you order it, I want you to have it. I don't need it in my basement no more. I'd rather you have it. I know what's in the book. So come on, and not like another 2, 3 more good days or more of a lot of orders. Because let me tell you something. I'm using the money to make the movie. You got to see this movie. It's going to be good. Trust me. So get you a copy of a Black Business Book. That's what this is. And it's similar to the movie, but more facts, a lot more facts. The book is phenomenal. Somebody sent me a message, said it's the most comprehensive, easy to read book that they've come across. Because I don't give you no commentary. I just give you the fact and let it stand on its own merit. And some of them you ain't gonna believe. And I give you in the back of the book where I found it, the link. You can look it up yourself and read more. It's that good. So things is jamming here on the channel. Have you seen that video of that guy whose great grandfather almost was lynched? They had him at the tree, and my man was a Mason. And he did some Mason distress call. And the guy under the hood was a Mason too, and said, hey man, I'll let you go. You can run as fast as you can, but if they catch you, ain't nothing I can do. But I got you this far. That happened. It's on the video is on the channel. Did you see the video of the lady? And she's become a good friend of mine. I like this lady. She be retweeting in my stuff, which is at A Strong Dream is my Twitter. She retweeting, always sending me messaging things, how she like it and whatnot. But her video is they did never found her great-great-grandfather. He was on his way to, I think, Georgia or somewhere, and they never found him. He didn't make it to his father's funeral and never heard from him again. They believe he was lynched. Now, you hear me use that word strong a lot. Now, I gave you those videos because that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. You'll see. Strong stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. You've heard me say that. I'm going to keep saying it. I like it. And because that is the introduction to my guest today, this is a strong soul brother. Watch. He know what he talking about. So you need to subscribe to the channel. It's free. It don't ask no information. Just hit the button. My subscribers is up. And like what he got to say by liking this video, please. Hit the notifications bell. I put 4 or 5 videos up a week. I got another one coming up in the next day. That's going to be mind-blowing. And then tell somebody about strong inspirations. And so back to that word strong, which stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. Come on, my friend, introduce yourself. Let's get it on strong inspirations. Thank you for being on the channel.
Anthony, first of all, thank you for inviting me. So glad you were able to find me on the internet. We hadn't connected, but found out that I have a relative and you have a good friend. So we are closely connected right there in Detroit.
Yep.
My name is John Ashworth. I am the president of the Lynching Sites Project of Memphis. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in just a moment.
Yeah, before a minute, hold on. I do this to all my guests. I kind of say, ask a couple questions on you.
Go ahead.
And first of all, you heard what he said. He vetted me, everybody. Here's what he did. He said, man, I like what you're saying, but give me a couple of weeks. And then he dropped the call and everything. He vetted, but I checked out.
I did.
Where were you born, man? Ask you that?
You said where?
Yeah.
I was born in Wilson County, Lebanon, Tennessee.
Really? And so that's where your family all kind of originated?
My family originated there. As a matter of fact, if I'd known you was going to, in fact, I've got it right here. That's where my family originated. And not only that, we know that that's where we originated because here is the, oh, you can't see it because I'll change that in just a moment. But what I was going to show you, what I was attempting to show you was the bill of sale of my great grandfather. I therefore know where the name Ashworth came from.
Really?
Who is also the grandfather of your good friend and my cousin Keith there in Detroit.
Yes, that's my man.
But we actually found the actual bill of sale. He was sold in 1852 by a slave trader to another man and then resold again a few days later to Jasper R. Ashworth, which is where we got the name Ashworth from. So yes, my family originated in Wilson County, Tennessee. So
okay, let me ask you, how did y'all find that?
I tend to be a bit of an amateur historian, and I found it in the archives in Lebanon, Tennessee, in Wilson County. There is, for people who are interested in, I mean, if you really, the information is out there. And it can be discovered, but it takes a lot of research. And I would encourage people, if you don't have the time, you don't want to learn how to do it yourself, get with a good genealogist that knows how to go through the records. But it's very nuanced, but we did find it. And I am able to trace it from that bill of sale all the way down to myself.
So how old was he? Does it say at that bill of sale?
He was, in fact, I'll read it to you. And I want to say a little bit about this. For and in consideration of the sum of $500 in cash paid to me, I have this day bargained and sold and do hereby convey to J.Y. Blythe, my Negro boy John, aged about 9 years. I want the title of said boy and further warn him to be healthy, sensible, sound, and a slave for life. Lebanon, Tennessee, January 28th, 1852. And then that was on a Wednesday. And then on that following Monday, let me read this again and see where the name came from. For and in consideration of the sum of $501 to me paid, I have this day sold and bargained and do hereby convey to J.R. Ashworth Jr., my Negro boy John, aged about 9 years, and I warrant the little said boy and further warn him to be healthy, sensible, and sound, and a slave for life. February 2nd, 1852, J.Y. Blythe, State of Tennessee, Wilson County. And it goes on, person appeared before the clerk of the court, and it was recorded. And so it is recorded in the deeds and records at the courthouse.
Okay, hold on. Let's I like this, man, before we get into the thing now. So what you're saying is he was 9 years old.
He was 9 years old.
he was, and so he was born somewhere, and the slave catcher got him.
I don't know if
he
the slave
owned
catcher,
him or the guy who owned. Yeah, what's that conditions?
here's what I think the situation is. I think the slave, not a slave catcher, but I think it was a slave trader.
Right.
And understand that slave trading, if you visit Montgomery, Alabama, EJI, what you'll find out is that city had more slave traders. And I share that, what I'm pointing and saying about slave traders, just as people buy cars wholesale and resell them retail, slave traders did exactly the same thing. And what you have to keep in mind is that we were property. And when you read this deed, and I can tell you where that language came from, it's going to shock you a little bit. That language in there, and this is what people really need to latch on to, when it says, I warrant the said little boy and further warn him to be sensible and sound and a slave for life. That is no different than you selling something to someone and getting a warranty on it. It's the exact same process. This is business that we're talking about. And so what I suspect happened is that this slave trader purchased him from some farm somewhere, knowing that he was going to sell him again. Because if you remember, on the first bill of sale, he sold for $500. And on the second bill of sale, 4 days later, he sold for $501. Now, $500 in today's dollars is a little over $17,000. $1 in today's dollars is about $32. So in essence, over a period of 3 or 4 days, from that Wednesday to the following Monday, by simply holding him and reselling him, he made the equivalent of $32.
Okay, but let's delve into this way.
Go ahead.
How did the slave catcher even have the ability to sell him?
You said, how did what now?
How did he have the ability? The kid was born somewhere.
Right.
And so he was born a slave under somebody, and then the slave catcher facilitated that transaction.
Well, no, understand this. People who own slaves sold slaves as property, just like you would buy.
I see. Yeah.
Right. I mean, in other words, it's not a case of catching him. It's a case of going to a farm or somewhere where there are, 25, 30, 40, 100 slaves, and simply saying, hey, I want to buy your slave. And this is a business transaction. This is a young boy. A young boy at age 9, his value is going to consistently go up as he ages. As a matter of fact,
really? Does it?
Oh, okay. Yes. Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, and I'm sure you've heard of Nathan Bedford Forrest. He's obviously very big in the Civil War. He was a serious slave trader. And you can look at the bills of sale, and we have copies of them, where he sold people, and depending on the age, depending on the sex, as to what the value was placed. On average, around 1850s, well, at the end of the Civil War, just before the Civil War ended, roughly you could say on average, a healthy slave was probably worth about somewhere between $800 to $1,000, just depending. And so, and the important thing to remember about slavery, and everybody should lock onto this. As horrible as it was, understand it was an economic system. It was about money. Now, hate is in there to be sure, because when you start to talk about lynching, what you very quickly realize, if you do, and I have a database of over 4,500 lynchings that we know about, and trust me, there's many, many more that we'll never know about.
Yeah.
But what you understand is that there were more whites lynched before the Civil War and more blacks after the Civil War. And the very simple reason is that black bodies were monetary value before the end of the Civil War, because they were property. You could literally go to the bank and say, hey, I pledge these 5 black men or these 5 black women as collateral for this loan. It is a business transaction. And so you don't have that much lynching and killing of property, just like if you had a herd of cattle. Right.
I got you.
That's what we're talking about.
You own it, man. You jamming. Hold on. I want to stay on that slave thing.
Go ahead.
Did that make you cry when you saw that?
When I saw the sale of my father, of my great-grandfather, I had all the emotions that go with that. Whether or not I shed tears, I don't know if I shed tears, but I had all the emotions. But let me tell you what was probably the most emotional moment for me. I was living in Nashville, Tennessee at the time, and my grandson, who is now a sophomore in college, was visiting me from Atlanta, and he was about 8 or 9 years old. And it was late at night, and I was sitting in the house, and the bedroom was right behind my den, and he was in there sleeping. And for some reason, I picked that document up somewhere near midnight and read it, and just suddenly it hit me then.
Wow.
What it would feel like if someone was trying to do that to my grandson. I mean, that became that became very, very emotional. I mean, that realization hits very, very hard, because you can sit there and imagine that my great grandfather was about the age, same kind of behavior, a child, and you're taking him from his mother and you're selling him to somebody else. You know, and one of the other things that I'm going to say on this, and like it's really a lot I could say, but
sure.
One of the other points I really, really want to make, and I'm going to say, in many ways, in my limited mind, I look at Black women as being the mother of this country, and let me tell you why.
Okay.
They are the people who watched their children sold at 9 o'clock in the morning and still had to have lunch ready for the plantation by noon. They had no time to grieve. But not only that, so they had to raise their children, give their children up, but they also nourished the children of their slave masters.
That's right, yeah.
So when you think about the contribution that Black, and I'm not patronizing by any means, but when you think about when you think about what actually happened, not what Hollywood says happened, when you make your way into the actuality of what all this really, really means, we have a lot to uncover.
Yeah, okay. I want to stay on this just a couple. I got a couple more questions. Okay, so then what happens to him?
What happens to him? Yes, let me tell you what happens to him. This is in 1852. I find him again in in fact, I just sent it to Luther. I find him again in the 1870, wait a minute, let me go back. I find who I believe him to be in the 1860 census. Now, let me explain that. Before emancipation, before the Civil War is over, African Americans were not recorded by name in the US Census. The way it was done is that the census was taken, whoever the slave master was, his name was recorded, and then underneath him, there is a listing by sex and age of all the enslaved people that he had. And in the case of John, I have the 1860, page 32 of the census records from Wilson County. On line 32 is the name of Jasper R. Ashworth. And then following below that, and on the next page, are the ages and the sex of the enslaved people that he owned. On the second page, there is a male Black, 17 years old, and there's one that is male Black and 15 years old. I think the one that is 17 years old, I think that is actually the same John that was sold to Jasper Ashworth. So now the next time I find him, and I'm largely going by the age, the next time I find him is in the 1870 census. By now he is married, and he is married to a lady whose name is the same name that my grandfather told me about, because I grew up with my grandfather. But I find him married, and he has 3 children. I find him again in the 1880 census, because the 1870 census are the first time that across the country, the names of African Americans are actually recorded on the slave schedule, or on the Census Bureau form. Right. So I am able to track him. I'm able to track him and his wife, Ann. I'm able to track their children. And I eventually get to 1880, I think it is. And there in 1880 is my grandfather, 7 years old. And then the next time I pick up on that, because of the census records of 1900, I think there was a big fire in St. Louis or somewhere, and those records burned. But I picked them up again in the 1910 census. And now John, who I picked up in 1880, is now married to my grandmother, and they have children. And this is a grandfather that raised me. So I am able to track that all the way down through there.
Did he stay in that same town?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. As a matter of fact, in Lebanon, Tennessee, there is a section, it's not called that now, but there's a section that was called Ashworth Glades. And Jasper Ashworth, and of course it was Jasper Ashworth Jr. and his father, J.R. Ashworth, they owned a tobacco plantation, and he also had a tavern. And that area where they were was called Ashworth Glades. And of course, eventually it became the Glades, and now I've forgotten what it's called now. But I've been there several times to know
so
exactly where
that was going to be my next question. Have you been there?
Yes, I have.
Did you meet them, the white folks?
No, I haven't met them. No. I know that there is a very large sect of Ashworths, and I know they come out of England, as most of them did, obviously. But I don't know of any white Ashworths that are in that part of the country now. But I do know that there is a very large family of Ashworths here in the United States.
Okay, this is a question here, and I hope you don't mind I ask this one.
Go ahead.
You and I are fair complected. Where does the fair complexion come in your family?
I can trace
from what I can tell. You follow?
Yeah, no. It says I can't think of her name now. She's at Vanderbilt University. Said a Black female who's on the faculty there, and somebody listening will probably know it. But as she said, we have rape-colored skin. When you talk about Confederate statues, look at us. When you look at our skin, you are looking at rape-colored skin.
Yeah, that's what
I can trace in my family. I can't name the exact person, but I can get to the generation and probably the person on both my mother and my father's side of the family where there was probably a white ancestor in there. Right.
Yeah, they couldn't keep their hands off them Black women.
Well, no, and that brings up another interesting discussion as we talk about enslavement. And think about this. In Europe, which is where there's a lot I'd like to get to about that, but in Europe, children took the status of the father. But when they get to America and enslavement becomes an institution, children take the status of the mother. And I'm telling you that to say that the enslavers rule that if a child is born to an enslaved woman, that child is a slave.
Right.
And I'm telling you that to make the point that there were many white plantation owners who raped Black women who knew that their children, and they planned it that way, were going to be enslaved, their own children. So you have to understand, what is going on, what this mindset is, because there's a lot to unpack. Joy DeGruy in her book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, posits the idea that African Americans have gone through 400 years of trauma with no intervention. White America has gone through 400 years of cognitive dissonance with no intervention. Both of those things are very true. As I've often said, someone said, enslavement, the institution of enslavement is white history. The survival of enslavement is Black history. And both of those stories told together is American history.
Yeah, that's true. So now this all kind of led you to like Black history like it does. You sat there on your father's lap and he told you stories, and that grew this desire for you to want to learn as much like you have?
No, let me tell you what grew my desire to want to learn as much as I can. As I started to say, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but my grandfather had his own, was eventually able to cease sharecropping and buy his own land. As a matter of fact, that land is still in our family today from way, way back. It's over 100, been in the family over 100 years.
Hold on, Wilson County, where was that at?
Wilson County, Tennessee.
That's okay.
Wilson County, Tennessee. In fact, it's out in what was a very, very rural area now. And Luther will tell you about this also. It's on a road that was called Africa Road, and it's still named Africa Road today. But what I was going to tell you about that is that, I lost my train of thought, was in Wilson County, as I said, very far out there. Oh, and what led me to this interest, Wilson County probably even today has a very low percentage of African Americans. My father and my mother met in college. They married, they had me, and my mother died as a result of my birth. So I grew up in Wilson County with my grandparents. My father, on the other hand, had his career and eventually wound up in Haywood County, Tennessee. Haywood County, Tennessee has always, and even to this day, has been majority African American. And back when I first started coming down to visit my father in the late 40s, early 50s, on a Saturday afternoon when we would go into town, there was just this mass. I mean, this mass of Black people, and they were coming in town to shop from working on the farms all week, because all this, keep in mind, is a carryover from the plantation era. And it just struck me as a child where all these Black people came from.
Okay.
And so as I matured, as I got older, and I began to understand a little bit about Black history, the thing that stuck out to me, and to this day that really got me involved, because I really started in a different direction from where I am today, several years ago, is to say, wait a minute, I want to look at African-American history, and I want to look at African-Americans, but I do not want to see them as victims. I really want to see them as actors, because everybody has Native intelligence. And I was committed to understand the African-American story from the standpoint of how African-Americans, even in enslavement and beyond, how they use that Native intelligence to make their way. Because I think, you know, we've done so much in telling the story about the horrors of lynching and enslavement and racial terrorism, but we haven't quite concentrated as much. Now, obviously, we know about the peoples whose names are emblazoned in lights and books and so forth, but we don't spend very much time talking about, for want of a better word, the ordinary, everyday African-American. So that led me, along with some friends of mine, to begin to try and do a little bit of a museum or a story about how African-Americans use their Native intelligence. Ella Baker, who doesn't get nearly enough credit, and we need to work on that, made a very interesting quote. She's quoted as saying, oppressed people.
Who is she? I never heard of her.
You never heard of Ella Baker?
Not, if my guest might not have heard. Just give us a short version,
Dr. Cornel West, who I know you've heard of, has said, if there had been no Ella Baker, we may not have known of Dr. Martin Luther King. That's just how powerful she was. But understand, she was in an era where Black women did not have that much agency, where they were not recognized for their strength and ability. But Ella Baker is quoted as saying, oppressed people, whatever their level of formal education, have the ability to understand and interpret the world around them, to see the world for what it is and move to transform it.
Okay.
And so I'm saying that, so when you understand that, if you understand the power of that statement alone, then you begin to understand, wait a minute, there's another story about African-Americans that has not been told.
Okay, let me stop you there. Hold on, let me
go ahead.
Do me a little bit more though. This Ella Baker lady, she's from where? And
Ella Baker was a part of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Okay, and she was in Montgomery?
No, she was in Atlanta.
Oh, Atlanta, okay.
Yeah, she was in Atlanta. She was a part of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, a very, very strategic thinker. And as she really is, I guess for want of a better expression, I wouldn't put her on the same trajectory as an Ida B. Wells, but I will tell you that if Black women during the civil rights movement had been afforded the platform that they should have been afforded, she would be right there on the parallel with Dr. King.
I got you. So now, as you delve into understanding Black history, for lack of a better word on my part, you go with what is maybe the most, I don't know the word, let's say diabolical, the most, I don't know, let's say, I don't know, let's go with negative. When you talk about lynching, I mean, that's the end of the game for that person's life. You go for that to be what you study, maybe, and I'm not putting words in the most. Well, how does that happen?
Let me tell you how I got to that. Because we were focused on looking at how African Americans use their Native intelligence. As you begin to get into that, you can't help but get into what happened on the other side, the terror that was arrayed against them. And there was a group in Memphis called the Lynching Sites Project.
Right.
There was, in fact, if you look at my background, you'll see some trees and so forth. That is actually a lynching site where a lynching occurred in 1917. And in 1917, a man by the name of L. Persons in Shelby County, Memphis, Tennessee, was lynched. He was accused of murdering a little white girl.
It's always a white woman, ain't it?
It's always a white woman. But Brian Stevenson from Equal Justice Initiative spoke to a group of people in Memphis and said, listen, Shelby County, you had more lynchings in Shelby County than any other county in Tennessee, and you need to do something about that. And at that time, he told them about 21 lynchings. They formed the organization, and one of the ladies with them, she's a retired professor from University of Memphis, began doing research, and we now know about 35 lynchings that took place in Shelby County. But the signature event was that L. Person was lynched in 1917. He was accused of killing, but the law enforcement community at that time really did not believe that he did it. But anyway, so they lynched him, but these people wanted to do a 100th anniversary in 2017, and they needed a project manager or project director. And they heard about me, and that's how I got picked up to be their project director, which morphed into my becoming their executive director, which morphed into my becoming the president of the Lynching Sites Project. So that kind of gives you the long and short of how I got there. But I want to tell you something else about the L. Person's lynching that I'm sure a lot of people don't know. When that lynching took place, James Weldon Johnson, who we all know as the author of Lift Every Voice and Sing, was in 1917 the field secretary for the NAACP. And James Weldon Johnson actually came to Memphis in 1917, went to the lynching site, and he actually wrote an article that you can find in the NAACP Crisis magazine. And I want to read you what he said.
Yeah.
He said, and he went to the site, and this is what he said. As he's at the site, he said, I reassemble the picture in my mind of a lone Negro in the hands of his accusers, who for the time are no longer human. He is chained to a stake. Wood is piled under and around him, and 5,000 men and women with babies in their arms and women with babies in their wombs, look on with pitiless anticipation, with sadistic satisfaction, while he is baptized with gasoline and set afire. The mob disperses. Many of them complain they burned him too fast. And this is what James Weldon Johnson says. I tried to balance the suffering of a miserable victim against the moral degradation of Memphis, and the truth flashed over me that, quote, in large measure, the race question involves the saving of Black America's body and white America's soul. And I have given many presentations, and I have said that statement is as true today as it was when it was uttered by him in 1917.
Now, okay, let me ask you this then. When we talk about lynching, we're not just talking about hanging. It's any way that they wanted to kill you.
Let me talk about that. There is a I knew that you and I were going to do this today, so I pulled it out. In fact, I'm going to change my background because I want you to see this. Give me just a second.
Oh, everybody, I told you, my man. If you don't like this video, I don't know what's wrong with you, other than you don't like hearing this truth.
Let's see. I'm trying to get. Oh, I know what's wrong. Hang on a second. There, okay. Maybe, yeah, you can see it now. Okay. This is an article, if you can see the headline, it says, and what it talks about, war of words, the controversy over the definition of lynching.
Right.
Now, this is a document, and what this document shows is that from 1939 until 1940, there was this big war of words that was carried on, and it ultimately wound up being a meeting, a convention at Tuskegee Institute in 1940, and a man by the name of Monroe Wark, who did the first efforts at documenting or creating a database of lynching. And I'm sharing that with you to say this about lynching.
Okay.
The question becomes, what is the definition of a lynching?
Right.
And as everybody knows, the United States to this day has not enacted a federal anti-lynching law. The bill has been passed by both the House and the Senate, but it has not been signed into law yet. But the accepted definition of a lynching, it is the taking of a life extrajudicially by 3 or more persons. Now, so when we say lynching, we typically, because Hollywood has sanitized us or has lulled us into thinking of lynching as a man sitting on a horse with a rope over limb around his neck, the horse runs out, he swings, he dies, and that's it.
Right.
Lynching can be by rope, can be by shooting, can be by fire, can be by drowning, it can be by any means that you can think of taking a person's life. And for the quasi-legal definition is by a mob of 3 or more people.
Okay.
That's what a lynching is. And there were many of them that took place just that way. In the case of L. Persons was set on fire while still alive and burned to death. And once he had, and I heard one of your other guests, once he was dead, they did in fact cut his body up. In fact, they cut his head off and carried it down on Beale Street in Memphis and threw it at African Americans on that street. I mean, that's just, you know, and all of these are very horrible. But now I want to pivot back to something else that I said I want to share with you. I think, and I said this, and I've done a lot of presentations. In fact, there's one presentation that I do called Roots of Racism that I'd love to someday do for your group.
Yeah, well, we're gonna have it back. You know.
Okay, but what I want to say about I almost think that we need another word for the word. In fact, there's a couple of words that I think we need a new word for, and lynching is one of them, and I'll tell you the reason why.
Yeah.
Lynching, as it was instituted on African Americans post-Civil War, was not about punishment. It wasn't just about taking of the life. It was about a form of control and sending a message. And so the lynching that was done in that instance in no way looks like what they did to a cattle rustler in a Western movie, because there was a brutalization of the human body before it was dead, and then there was a mutilation of that same body once it was dead. This was intended to send a message, and as one of your guests said, these are what are known as spectacle lynching.
Yeah.
It is a form of entertainment. There are instances where churches were let out. There's an instance in Georgia where a train was run from the town out to where the lynching was going to take place. In the case of L. Person, it was advertised in the newspaper that there was going to be a lynching that day. And a mob of a little over 5,000 showed up. In Florida, they took a preacher out of the pulpit and hung him. In Lake County, Tennessee, they hung 3 men inside of a church. So understand what this thing is. It's not just the taking of the life. It is the sending, in a very terroristic way, a message that if you get out of line, this is what's going to happen.
Okay, let me ask you this. Now, when we say they, we can't just say they all. It was only KKK people that did lynching.
No, let me correct you on that one.
Right.
There were a lot of lynchings that were done that really, it was not organized by the KKK. There were all kinds of little groups all across the country. How they were organized, I'm not quite sure. But there were all kinds of groups. So the KKK, to be sure, is a part of that. But the bulk of the lynchings that were done, understand, these lynchings were done by good, upstanding citizens. They were doctors, they were lawyers, they were farmers. These are ordinary, everyday working people. This is not, see, and that's one of the mistakes that we make of thinking that, wait a minute, these are this rogue group. No, it's not, because that was an accepted way of doing things, and which is why I want to eventually pivot back to say, understanding what the roots of racism is and understanding why racism is so very intractable in this 21st century information age. Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you this then. Okay, let's say this.
Go ahead.
Hypothetically speaking, you talk about Shelby County and 32 lynchings.
35.
35, but you're saying that's 35, and I'm not minimizing it by no respect in my comment, my question.
Right.
You're saying that's 35 from, let's say, 18 something to 19 something. So that is not, I mean, all of them are bad, but that's not like every day, every month, or even one every year almost.
No, remember a few minutes ago, I said to you that I had a database of a little over 4,500 lynchings that occurred throughout. The bulk of them in the Southeastern United States, the former Confederate states, but they're all over the country. I have a database of a little over 4,500. I actually sat down one day and said, okay, let me see if I can find, using all the years, from about 1870 until about 1950, let me see if I can find a calendar date in any year, or a calendar day within a 365-day period when a lynching did not occur. I found one date.
Really?
It was leap year, February the 29th. Nobody was lynched, but every day of the week, every single day of the year, there was a lynching, in one year or the other, there was a lynching somewhere in this country. I mean, that's just how pervasive it was. And if you understand if you understand the Civil War, and then you understand Reconstruction, and then you understand what happened when Rutherford Hayes got in office and they pulled the federal troops out of the South. See, there's a lot to unpack where all this stuff is concerned.
Yeah.
But if you understand that and begin to understand that when they come back in and they take over, now that, because Lincoln gets assassinated, Johnson becomes the president, Johnson is sympathetic to the South and really extracts no penalty for the people who fought against the country. And eventually the Freedmen Bureau eventually pull the federal troops out of the South. So now you have these old Confederates that are determined by any means necessary to return African Americans to the status they were. And there comes the era of the racial terrorism.
Do you find in any case where they actually tried to try the people who did the lynching? I'm talking about on charges.
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, in the case of L. Person, the one that we just talked about, and there's other cases like that where not in the case of L. Person, but there's another one in Memphis, and I think the man's name is, and I may have them mixed up because there's a lot of them. But anyway, because the sheriff allowed the mob to take over, they actually charged the sheriff and actually tried to hold a trial, but they couldn't see the panel. They went through 500 people and couldn't see the panel. But there are some documented cases, and I'll certainly be glad to get them for you, where they did in fact put white people on trial for the lynchings. Didn't happen a lot, but it did happen.
Yeah.
As I said, there's a lot to be unpacked.
Yeah, sure. So now, what was what do you think? How did Black people live under that condition?
How did they live?
Yeah, knowing that they under that threat.
Much the same as, and keep in mind, there are still a lot of Black people who are still traumatized, whether they realize it or not. But it's like anything else. You simply go about your life. Then, as a matter of fact, let me give you a perfect example. When you read, and think about this, when you read many church histories, go find some church histories, churches that have been around, there was Black churches I'm talking about that was started way, way, way back. Go read the church histories in those communities where those lynchings occurred. And what you will find is that the churches were silent about what happened. Just as we have things happen all around us and nobody will say anything for fear of what may happen to them. And you adapt, just as we do today, you adapt and you go on, and you'll hear people say, well, they use the N-word, they call me this, they did that, they did it. Well, that really doesn't bother me. Yeah, it does bother you. But the problem with that is that we have become so, as a defense mechanism, it's either that fight or flee or what have you. There's a very interesting book out by a Black man, a psychologist by the name of Resman Mannequin, called My Grandmother's Hands. And he talks about this fight or flight or flee. That is a lot of the way that they had to do that. I mean, there's nothing you could do about it. I mean, if you can understand that in enslavement, they had no repercussions against their children being sold. Once they're out and these terror things are occurring, that fear is still there because the people who were doing that then are still the same people that are with them, even though it's post-Civil War.
Like, for example, one of the ladies on the channel, she said that there was a lynching, a guy was going to the drugstore and had done nothing. He's walking there and he's minding his own business. And they grab him and say, you next.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, Walter White, who was one of the field secretaries for the NAACP and could in fact did pass for being white. I mean, he was light-skinned. If you see pictures of him, he would often go to these towns where lynchings occurred and he'd do the investigation, but his white skin would protect him. And he simply asked a question, and he even reported that in some of the conversations that he had with them, some of the lynchers, they said, well, yeah, we really lynched the wrong one, but so what? It's, that's just too bad. I mean, that's just the kind of thing that you had going on.
Let me, we got to come to close at some point, but a couple more questions.
Go
What
ahead.
was the mood of the country where it was not happening? Like, for example, what was the mood of the country in Kansas or in Michigan where it wasn't prevalent, in northern states, and the media is telling these stories?
I think, one of the things that you find out, and for those who may be listening in and may have an account with newspapers.com, we mythically say that the North was this, the North was that. But I think what's important to understand is that while you had, the institution that you had in the Confederate States with enslavement in the South, it was an agricultural economy. And what you had in the North was an industrial economy. But insofar as whether or not people really cared one way or the other about Black bodies, what you really have to go back and understand is one of the things that I said I'd like to do with your group again, is to understand the roots of racism, is that the colonists that came here with the idea that African Americans, even before 1619, were less than human. And that comes out really earlier, but I can document it out of the 15th century, when the Catholic Church, the Pope in the Catholic Church says to the nations of Europe, wherever you go in the world, if you find lands that are not ruled by Christian, and of course he's really saying white Christian, the land is yours for the taking. You can subdue those people and you can enslave them. They are less than human. And this idea has been with us, and whether we want to admit it or not, and it's very difficult to do that, religion is wrapped very tightly around this idea, and religion and government has literally been very complicit and supported, because remember, enslavement was a legal system on up until the Civil War ended. And so when you really start to dig deeply into why this is embedded so deep and it is so intractable, it's all tied up in that. In the Dred Scott decision that Justice Roger Taney issues, he talks about the fact that these ideas that Africans are less than whites, he talks about it in the Dred Scott decision and admits that the colonists brought the idea with them when they came over here. So it's like, as I said, there's a lot to be unpacked.
So you've seen newspaper clippings, I'm sure, that have said and advertised in lynchings.
Oh, I don't have one in front of me right now, but I can get one to you very quick that you can put on your website. There's any number of them. Oh yeah.
And there's no response from the president or anything.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a very interesting case down in Valdosta, Georgia, and you and I talked about it, but I won't give all the horrors of it. But when this lady who is 8 months pregnant is literally lynched, Walter White writes a letter to the then president, which I think.
And Walter White is a Black guy or white guy?
He's actually a Black guy, but he can pass for white.
Okay.
At that time, he's a field secretary of the NAACP. Okay. He writes to the governor of Georgia and he writes to the president, and basically nothing is done. And in a lot of these lynchings, where good people of goodwill, both Black and white, and especially white, of goodwill, actually petition the governor of that state to send troops in or do something to prevent a lynching from occurring. That happened in the case of L. Persons. In 1917, they petitioned the governor of Tennessee, and I can't think of his name now, to send troops because they knew that there was going to be a lynching. And so that happened in a number of cases.
Is there any organization, in particular a white organization, that stands up against lynching?
Yes. As a matter of fact, and let me just give you the name. Hold on, let me just find it. There's a group called the Association of Southern Women for the Prevention of Lynching, and it is primarily a white female group in Alabama at the time that is actually opposed to. There's a number of groups, there's a number of efforts that have been out there to do that, and as a matter of fact, they were a part of that 40-year conversation about what lynching was. And let me give you a little bit of the essence of that war word.
Let's roll. Yeah, please.
That idea started. Monroe Ward went to work for Tuskegee. He graduated, he got his doctorate in psychology at the University of Chicago, went to Tuskegee, was on the faculty, and he's the one that started to create the database, working with the Chicago Tribune.
And we hold on, we're talking about what time period?
We're talking about the early 1900s.
Okay.
Around 1900. And again, I can get you all the documents on that. Yeah. So anyhow, he starts to work on that. So the discussion becomes, as Ida B. Wells is looking at this, and she's saying that she's blaming the whole community. This is a community thing. And so they begin to have these discussions about what constitutes a lynching. And they look at it from the standpoint, this is a social problem. This entire community is guilty of this. As time goes by, there's a man by the name of, a white man by the name of, I want to say Peabody, but that's not his name, but a philanthropic, wants to put money up. And so now they begin to say, in order to do something with lynching, in the courts, we have to be able to define what it is. And so now this battle begins to go back and forth. Do you define lynching in legal terms, or do you define the lynching in sociological terms? And what ultimately comes out of that, and I think there's still some debate going on even to this day, but what comes out of that, if we are going to be able to attack this from a legal standpoint, we have to come up with a definition of what lynching is. And therefore, we cannot just say the entire community where it occurred is guilty. We have to begin to find a way to narrow down what the guilt is. Broad brush, that's what the essence of that is.
Yeah. So as lynching is occurring all over, how does it, for lack of a better word, and I know I remember hearing that they dragged the guy in Jasper and so on and so forth, which is the same concept. Yeah. But how does it, is there any laws that ever get on the books, or how does it subside over time in the 50s or the 60s? When does lynching kind of stop happening to the same extent?
To the same extent and the same degree. Here's what we need to understand. Lynching, understand what lynching was intended to do. Lynching was intended to return African Americans to a very, very subservient position of servitude, extract their free labor, keep them at the very bottom of everything. That's what it was intended to do. The brutalization, the murders do in fact dissipate, and they go down. By the 1940s, there's not nearly as many lynchings occurred. I mean, you can almost graph it out. There's not
hold
nearly.
on, let me stop you there. So you're saying that the high point of lynching is from when to when?
High point of lynching, probably that era right around late 1800s on up until about 1920.
Okay,
somewhere along in there.
If you, I got these questions coming at me, man, and you're knocking them off the box. How about this? The most lynchings that happened in any period was when?
I really don't want to say that it was this particular set of years, but I think if you look around the 18, and I'm kind of coming off the top of my head on this one, I really need to look at the data.
I got you.
But I think if you look somewhere around between 1880 to about 1920, and I know that's a 40-year span. Is
there ever an uprising among the Black people to counter-react on that? We're gonna get out. We found a way to get guns. Now we're shooting back. You ain't doing this no more.
Yes.
What was that? That's our last.
Well, if you remember Nat Turner, if you remember a number, there have always been those instances.
Man, I told you it's gonna be good. If you don't subscribe to Strong Inspirations, I'm gonna keep giving you these good people. I'm having him back on here.
There has never, ever been a time in the history of Black and white folks when we had an equal relationship. And as I've said to many people, Black and white alike, I have no desire to return to the relationship that existed between us and white people, even as recently as this morning. So the word needs to be racial conciliation.
I got you.
Words have meaning. Yes, words have a lot of meaning. And we need to do something with that word slavery, because people are quick to tell you slavery was in the Bible. Yes, it was, but there is no place in the world, and I've asked a lot of people, who have the academic acumen to answer that question. Where in the world can you tell me slavery was practiced where people bred people to be sold? Where can you show me in the world where people were stripped of their total identity and declared property, even when people were indentured as indentured servants, and even when they were captured in Africa? Their culture, their name, and everything else remained the same. Yeah. It is only when you get to the way enslavement was done in the United States that you see where people were literally purposely bred to produce offspring to be sold. And so I think that word slavery, I think that word lynching, I think that word racial reconciliation, we need to find another word for all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Now that's just me.
I love it. Hey man, that's it right there. That's it. Oh my God, that's it. Everybody, like what I said to you a second ago, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button on this video. On this video. He didn't scare you, he just gave you the history. It ain't meant to scare you. We walk around freely today. You can live almost anywhere we want to. You got enough money to buy the house. But it's not to scare you, it's just to let you know the history and the makeup of what has happened. And he did it very succinctly. And if we as a people don't figure that out, come back at you. Well, what's the website and do y'all have events and that kind of thing?
We do.
How do people follow you, so on and so forth?
Go to the Lynching Sites Project of Memphis. Lynching Sites Projects of Memphis, and just Google that and you'll find us. In fact, you'll find the names, and we don't know about all the names, but you'll find and we know that we know about victims that were lynching. In fact, there's one very famous case you can see it on our website. We know everything about the person that was lynched. We know where he came from. We know when he was lynched. We know who did it. We know why they did it. We know what he did to precipitate it. The one thing that we do not know is his name. But, and I'm saying that, but go to that website. There's a lot of information there, and take a look at that. There's a famous case here in Haywood County of Elbert Williams was the first, even though we know about Medgar Evers, but there was a man before Medgar Evers that was lynched for doing civil rights work because he was trying to get people registered to vote. And it's an interesting story how African Americans went from the Republican Party over to the Democratic Party. All of that's tied in there together. Yeah, right. I know. We're gonna put the website in the description here on the video. Do y'all have any kind of social gatherings, events, or celebrations you do? Whatever. We do. COVID obviously changed the dynamics on everything, and we now do. And in fact, though, you can see a lot of them on the website. We now do most of our meetings and our events by Zoom. And we twice a month, usually on the second and the fourth Monday of the month, we do a community meeting and we have a guest speaker in. One that I think you'd be very interested in, I can put you in touch with them. It is a lady, it's two ladies, one black, one white, and they did not know each other growing up, but what they found out is that the white lady's family owned the black ladies' families as enslaved people. And the two of them get together, they figure this out, and they jointly do presentations of that. I will tell you that, and it's on our website also, one of the police officers that was involved in the L. Persons lynching that I told you about, his son, not his son, one of his descendants found out about us and about that lynching, that his relatives were involved, and he came back to make a pilgrimage to that site. I've done an interview with a lady, and of course she's deceased now, but she was 9 years old and she witnessed the lynching of her father. And I did an interview with her to appear before the Tennessee legislature because we finally got the equivalent of the Emmett Till Act in the state of Tennessee, and we're working through that now, which gives rise to the other organization I'm involved in, Tennesseans for Historical Justice. And we've got a website and a Facebook page also. Whoa, everybody, we can't stop. We can't stop here. All right, everybody, that, just for the sake of it. Thank you so very much for coming on the channel. Thanks for allowing me to speak. Really appreciate it. We're going to talk some more offline. You know how we do. Okay. And then I say this with all sincerity, my brother, cool. I'm glad you vetted me and I proved because I wanted you on the channel. Oh my God. That I want you to, with all sincerity, like I say, stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. I love what you're doing. This has become your calling. I know you spend a lot of time at it. I do. You made a career out of it. I did. I'm in retirement in that area, and you teaching other people. You preserving that history.
we love you, man, for doing this, man.
Thank you. But thank you, Anthony.
Thank you so much, everybody. With that, I'll say bye-bye, we out.